how long did you stay at Tonka?
I was at Tonka for 7 years, and the toy industry, as I like to tell people, is almost like being in the mafia. Once you're in, you're in. In fact, like that, a few years after I left Tonka to go work in high tech, I ended up going back into the toy industry. A friend of mine became president of a toy company. He said, "I need a head of R&D," and I was his friend, so I said, I tried to get out and they dragged me back in, But anyhow, I ended up going back into the toy industry in the late 80s with Tomy Toys, and then on with Bandai, which then led to the Power Rangers and that whole thing. But
so were you the head of the design team?
I was head of the design at both for Tomy America and then for Bandai America. Bandai America in 1992 was a small arm of the larger Bandai empire. We were, doing $4 to $5 million a year in revenue. You're not a big influence in the toy market. And then one day we were presented with the challenge. Frank Ward was the president of Bandai, and I was head of product design, and then us two and Shuki Levy and Haim Saban got together, and we were given a property from Japan that Bandai said, you need to turn this into a property for the United States market. That property is called ZYU, Zoo Rangers. And so we literally, Power Rangers was frankly came out of a very formulatic approach. In 1992, we looked at the raw footage we were going to have to base this thing on, and we just looked at each other like, this is just junk. This is crap. And the only thing we can do with this is have fun with it.
Sure.
Just camp it up. And you looked at the time we saw it was very, like I said, formulatic. The target audience for such a market like Power Rangers is a 4 to 7 year old boy. That's your classic target market for action figures, things like that. And so you typically have a toy life cycle of about 3 years before they move on, before you have another generation of 4 to 7 year old boys.
Right.
Because by the time they're 7, especially now, even younger, they're already into computer games and everything else.
Right.
But anyhow, so we just basically took the approach of, what do boys want? They want power. Oh, mark that down, power. What do they want? They're like military stuff. Okay, we need some kind of military, some kind of that kind of feel about this. Rangers fit that, like Texas
Sure.
Rangers. So we already have that. What else do boys like? Dinosaurs. Well, if you remember at the time, 1992 was the apex of
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park.
Right.
So you had dinosaurs were on,
front and
top
center.
of the mind, front and center, and of course and they lived to be teenagers, which is why at that time, same property, same time era, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Mm-hmm.
We just basically took that approach of combining all those things, the transformation, dinosaurs, and teenagers and all that, and that became the Power Rangers brand.
Quite a witch's brew.
That's why you have Tyrannosaurus Rex. Becomes a Red Ranger. That transformation, and
right.
The White Ranger was the I think the saber-toothed tiger. And it was the first act. There were a number of historical things that happened with Power Rangers. You had 2 females. You had both the pink and the yellow Ranger. It was the first time you had females that were in a boys' product line, and for the first time you had girls' action figures that were outselling Barbie. When Power Rangers became the runaway hit, it became.
Wow.
Yeah.
Under my son's bed is a huge box of his cousin's Power Rangers. His cousin's about 10 years older than he is. And I mean, he's played, the limbs are all probably off him and stuff now, but he loved those. So they've gone through a couple of.
Well, the property's still around.
Oh yeah.
It became an evergreen property.
Yeah.
We had an interesting, again, talk about bringing this back to cars. In 1997, the Power Rangers at that time was 4 years old, so it was already into its second generation. And typically by then, a toy property starts to really fall off.
Right.
I had convinced the company to pursue licensing with NASCAR in 1997, so we became an associate sponsor of the Cranifus NASCAR team. And that year, even though we were in our 4th year, which typically was seen a precipitous traditionally, you'd see a significant drop off in sales. We increased our product sales by 44%.
And due to that NASCAR.
Due to NASCAR. We would take the Power Rangers. I had one of the most fun years of my life was 1997. Every weekend from February until November, I'm going to a different NASCAR race. I'm going all over the country, and I'm going with the Power Rangers. We'd show up on a Thursday and go to a local hospital, typically Children's Ward in a hospital. We'd bring a Red Ranger with me or whatever, and the kids just loved it. And we'd have the Rangers show up at the events, the pre-race events. They'd be there for qualification, and then they'd be there for race day. And back then, Power Rangers was a pretty big deal. And so they became, I didn't know. Mark Martin, bless his heart, came up to one day. He says, "I hate you." I said, "What I do, Mark?" He says, "Well, my kid used to consider me to be his hero. Now I have to compete with a Red Ranger." So that was and I got to tell you something. At that time, the people in the garage at NASCAR, Joe Gibbs was there, Terry Labonte and Jeff Gordon, and Dale Earnhardt was still alive. It was just so much fun to be involved in NASCAR in the late 90s, and its halcyon days there when it was, becoming second only to the NFL in terms of popularity and in terms of brand loyalty. The NASCAR was enjoying a 75% brand loyalty, which is why you had people like Tide and like that, who you think, what does that have to do with NASCAR?
Right.
Well, they found out, because of brand loyalty, and 40% of the audience back then was women. A little known fact, 40% was women. Yeah, and the reason for that was, it was real simple, because you think what their options were at that time. You could have your boy or girl idolize someone like a Jeff Gordon or Terry Labonte or Dennis Rodman. Well, guess which one the mom would prefer.
Right.
So the family values of NASCAR at that time was famous for that. You saw that at the tracks when you went there. Mm-hmm. The whole spirit was very family friendly. They had Joe Gibbs would lead Bible studies on Thursday night, and drivers would attend. It wasn't, and that wasn't for show.
Right.
That was serious. Who never no cameras there. This wasn't for publicity purposes.
Right.
That's what they believed.
By the way, it seems unusual to me that as a designer, you were taking such a direct interest in the marketing of the product.
Yeah, well, one of my mentors at Tonka, a guy that came to Tonka while I was there, was a guy named Chuck Weinschreider, God rest his soul. Chuck came to us from Quaker Oats. He was the EVP of Quaker Oats and very much responsible for Quaker Oats' success. Tonka at that time, when I started there, we were doing about $57 million a year in, year out in terms of toy sales. And Chuck and I became friends. And he was the new president of the company, and I was blessed to have that kind of relationship. And his counsel to me one day, when he came through the design department, of course we have all our stuff out, and Chuck comes by and I have my stuff. He likes us. He said, "That's nice stuff." And he said, and we got to talk about designing, and he said, designers. Well, someone had to design the Edsel. And I turned to him with, some smart ass 23-year-old and said, "Yeah, and some marketing guy had to approve it." Right. And he said, "Touche,"
Yeah.
Well, next day, my boss tells me, he says, Human Resources wants you to come by. I said, "Oh." The end of my career, I done talked back to the president. And they came down and said, Chuck was impressed and wants to groom you for executive position. Liked what you heard, liked the way you're thinking. So, it turned out that conversation was pivotal in my career. Well, Chuck had advised me in our conversations. He said one day, "Royce, we're not in the toy business, we're in the fashion business." And that stuck with me.
Because toys are very ephemeral.
Oh my gosh, it's totally, entertainment toys are, Siamese twins.
You're lucky to get a year or two, right?
Yeah, well, like I said, a lot of that is just due to the fact you've got a fast-moving demographic, the 4 to 7-year-old target market. So that's one influence. But then, yes, you have, because of the influence and the vicissitudes of public taste, highly influenced by media and the changing media. And so along the way, and that the impact of media and media influence and the sensibilities to marketing became very much a part of my professional education and experience. We were involved. We talked about toys, Power Rangers being broken. We did a commercial in 1975 with it's still, I was referencing it the other day in a conversation and people remembered it. We did Carmichael Lynch was our ad agency at the time, and we did this commercial it started out with a series of kids who were explaining to their parents why the toy broke. And they'd come up these fantastic stories. An alien came in, and my sister broke it. And one kid says, an elephant stepped on my toy. And then we had a mighty Tonka dump truck. Big yellow, this is all in a white cove. It's a simple white background. Big yellow dump truck, and we had an elephant. And the elephant would come down with its foot.
I remember that commercial.
And step on top of the truck. The tagline was, a toy shouldn't break just because a kid plays with it. That philosophy in my personal life then guided me towards the work I did for the Defense Department in battlefield trauma equipment. A medical device shouldn't break just because you're using it, kind of an approach.
And that's why when we started talking about this subject, I said the dots of your career didn't seem to necessarily connect.
Yeah, but they do.
From Tonka to battlefield medical technology.
Yeah. Well, again, it's providential. When you design toys, as I used to say to people, you have to design a product that's going to be abused by somebody who's never going to read the instructions.
Right.
And it still has to work. Because as soon as it breaks, it's not working, kid's done with it. Goodbye.
Right. So no matter how good your design is.
Yeah, so that became the design philosophy. Certainly at Tonka, the toy shouldn't break just because the kid plays it. And then when you're charged with coming up with designing medical products for battlefield trauma, that's a situation no one's going to read the instructions. You don't have time to read instructions. You better design something that's so intuitive they can look at this product, figure out how to use it, and abuse it, and will still work. Because somebody's life is going to depend on it. And that became, and people used to ask the Defense Department after I did the tourniquet design, then did the Crike design. I actually had an inquiry, how is it that you come up with these designs? I said, well, it's because I'm a toy designer, and the quizzical looks like, what? And I explained just what I said, because just like with a toy, you have to design a product that's going to be abused by somebody who's never going to read the instructions.
People are definitely aware that a lot of technology in the last 20 years has really increased the survival rate for battlefield casualties.
Which is why you see so many soldiers now with missing limbs that you didn't see up through Vietnam.
Right.
Because before they would have not survived.
Correct.
Yeah, the technology and the care has improved so much that those people who would have not lived are now living. But yes, that's the survivability coming out of the Iraq conflict, Iraq war, is much higher than it would have been 50 years ago.
And basically, you're responsible for some of the technology that allowed combat medics to stabilize the patient and buy time until they could get to a surgeon.
Yeah, well, I'm not. I have a great team of people that I worked with. I was very blessed to assemble and bring to these challenges. After I left Tonka, got out of the toy mafia, came to California to work in high technology. One of the first things we got involved, I was blessed enough to become involved with, was non-invasive imagery. And our team did the first trimodality ultrasound devices, and then we worked on what then was called nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, which they decided that nuclear wasn't a good marketing term. Right. So the jettisoned the nuclear, but now it's just NMR as we now know it. And that really gave me a great taste of doing medical design. Really, I loved it. I really loved that sense of, not that toys don't have meaning and impact, but medicine certainly has a different kind of one. And it was very, very rewarding. And then, like I said, with the mafia, I got drugged back into the toy industry. While I was working at Bandai, we had a consultant who had just had back surgery, and he couldn't find a back brace that he liked that was working for him in recovery. And he came to me one day and says, can you come up with a design for a back brace that may be better than what we have? And I came up with a design that kind of influenced the exoskeleton and became the whole mechanical advantage using pulley systems and things like that, which then gave rise to a company called Biocybernetics. And they became a very successful company in revolutionary orthotics that used that kind of approach, some of my design work, to build their product system. That then led to the application of their orthotics to a device called the T-Pod, which is a emergency medicine device that is used to wrap around an open book pelvic fracture, which is a life-threatening, very painful fracture. It happens a lot in motorcycle accidents. It does happen sometimes in childbirth, and it's literally where the pelvis opens up like a book. That's why it's called an open book fracture. Not only is it very painful, but many times it's accompanied by a femoral artery severing, and you get a pooling of blood in the abdominal region, and you'll get a BP crash. You'll have a patient which looks completely fine 1 minute, and suddenly the BP crashes to nothing. Mm-hmm. And you've got a very short period of time in which to revive that patient. Mm-hmm. The T-Pod took the orthotic design and it was a rapid application of about 200 pounds of circumferential compression around the pelvic area. So that became my first kind of exposure to trauma medicine application. The Defense Department used that device, liked it, came to Biocybernetics in 2004 because exsanguination or bleed out was the leading cause of death in the battlefield in both Afghanistan and Iraq due to IEDs. So at that time, the tourniquets that they were using had not fundamentally been changed since the Civil War. And so they had 10 requirements for a new tourniquet. You had to completely occlude blood flow, had to be non-powered, human-powered, applied in 10 seconds, had to be one-hand operation, and it had to be usable on a trapped limb. And they had spent about $5 million in about 2 years trying to solve that problem. And my team came up with a solution in 6 weeks that we presented. We were in San Antonio at the Army Surgical Research Institute presenting them the tourniquet, the mat tourniquet, which solved that problem, which then evolved into the cat tourniquet, which is very popular, but the mat is still on the market as well. So both those devices used widely in the field and have proven to have been pretty effective in reducing that exsanguination loss.
I do want to interject here that if you're watching or listening to this right now, think about what Royce just said. He told you that one of the military specifications was that the tourniquet had to be operated with one hand, which means that it had to be designed to put on yourself if you lost a limb in combat. That design requirement alone, that's pretty serious. Think about a product that you're designing that is literally going to save somebody's life. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I was at a medical conference in Camp Lejeune a few years later, and a corpsman, Navy corpsman, came up to me. I've never met this guy before in my life. He said, "Are you Royce Rumsey?" I said, "Yeah." I says, "I heard you were here." He says, "I came over, I wanted to meet you to thank you." He said, "Your tourniquet saved my friend's life in Afghanistan." And you know, it sounds corny, it sounds cliche, but when you get that kind of, you know, it's just a hair, you know, the hair on your arms go. I can remember this as vividly as when it happened. And I tell people, so I paid in full. I don't care what my salary was. To have that conversation with somebody, and you cannot put a value on that. Mm-hmm. To know that kind of thing has happened out there.
Right.
You know, so yeah, the rewards of being involved in medicine are far beyond any material value that you can have, in my estimation, my experience.
Right.
Yeah.
That's rewarding, but when it comes back to, I mean, how many people would approach you and say, "Hey, I wanted to tell you that toaster you designed really changed my life."
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. It's very rewarding.
As a designer, is it interesting to be able to consider the wide variety of materials?
It is. And the materials were critical to the tourniquet design. One was Delron 66 or Nylon 66 or Delron, which is a military grade plastic nylon that has a great modulus. It's very stiff, very strong, but it has a great kind of elasticity to it and memory. And because that, we created the tourniquet as a seat clamp, a flexible seat. That this gets back to the one-hand application. So I could put that on a leg, on a thigh, on a 39-inch thigh, and it would stay there.
Right.
Boom, put it on. Okay, now it's clamped on, and then it would, as we squeeze it down. Well, we basically, the way we designed the tourniquet was the design part that I was fortunate enough to come up with was basically creating a mini windlass. Which is like a tourniquet. You're turning this windlass, and the cord that we used in that is called strata, which is the same cord they use in parachutes.
Okay.
So we needed something that was that reliable, that strong and that reliable.
That's a 550-pound braking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's with great lifespan,
Right.
On indefinite lifespan kind of a thing. It's not going to deteriorate over time. So those two materials were critical to the tourniquet's design and its application success.